Now that we're more familiar with masking, in this lesson I'll show you how to take advantage of using bitmaps as masks to detail our materials further. Looking at my base paint, I want to add some minor details such as subtle scratches and dings that may occur from weathering. In the base paints folder, I'll create a fill layer, name it grunge, turn off the metal and normal channels, turn the base to dark black, and roughness closer to 1. And we don't want this covering the entire mesh, but instead of using the black mask, this time I'll add a bitmap mask. This will bring a drop-down which will allow you to pick any bitmaps from the shelf, or you can simply type in a name. For this, I'll use grunge 012. What this type of mask does is it places a bitmap, in this case a procedural, into our mask layer. Let's go ahead and just view it on the mesh. Looking at these spots, which are far too large, I'll go ahead and click on the grunge 012, which will allow me to edit the parameters on the procedural map we just used. And we can change the UV scale to around 20. Let's go back to material mode. It looks as though the mask needs to be inverted. So let's go ahead and click on invert. And I also don't want too much of it going around, so I'll push the balance and contrast up. And always roll the light around and zoom when necessary. Because we have a fill layer set up, we can also add some height information. I want these scratches to push into the mesh. So let's go to the fill layer and adjust the height to a negative value. Roll the light around to see the effect. Now that looks a little bit too much, so let's dial it in a bit more. Always rolling the light and zooming as necessary. So what exactly is this grunge 012 bitmap mask that we just added? Well, when you're on a fill layer, you'll notice it disappears, and when I click on the mask, it shows back up. If you look at it closely, it's very similar to the layers we have been working with. We have the visible button, an option for blend modes, and also a numeric slider to control the opacity. What this area highlighted in a dark red is essentially a layer stack for the mask, meaning we can create our own layers to composite a mask. Before moving on, I will change the blending mode of this grunge layer to multiply and the opacity to around 30 to lessen the effect on the base color. Let me show you a more complex mask setup by using something called a smart mask. What I want to do next is add a subtle highlight where my base paint layer is. So I'll add a fill layer, name it highlights, and turn off all the channels except for the base color, and choose a white color. And it'll be much easier to see this in the base color view mode, so I'll hit C to isolate the base color only. Find the smart mask. We can look in the shelf under smart mask, and I'll drag a edges strong onto our fill layer. You can see that it added 2 parts to create this mask. This one in particular is made of 2 layers, a sharpen and something called MG Mask Editor. Like the layer palette, this mask begins with MG Mask, and above is a sharpen effect applied. Let's go to the sharpen, and you can adjust the sharpen intensity. For this effect, we can dial it down to 0. By clicking on the MG Mask, we have a ton of parameters to play around with. For this example, I would just up the balance amount and the contrast just to hit the peaks, and finally add a blur to soften it up. I'll set the blending mode to overlay and lower the opacity to around 20. Now we have a bit of a highlight around the peaks of my mesh. Now you may want to go back to the base paint color and adjust the hue just to see if it's working. If you want to increase the effect, simply go to the opacity slider and increase the amount. Now that we've added a level of complexity to our base paint layer, let's move on to adding detail to our glossy paint layer.